What is up, everybody? This is Blackblade, and I'm not yet sure if this is a great idea or a terrible one. You see, after finishing my spring semester of college, I played through LEGO Star Wars 2 on the 360 to get all the achievements, and in doing so was inspired to play the rest of the LEGO games I've never gotten around to. From there, I wondered if I could make a video on this, and that's when the idea hit. I'm a big fan of the YouTuber Cosmonaut, who a couple years past did a 3-part mega analysis of the MCU. Seeing as I like the idea, I decided to give it my own spin. So, here it is. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Hunt for the Best. Before we start, however, allow me to briefly cover the plan with this mini-series. In each part, I'll be given a simplified review of up to 4 LEGO games by Traveler's Tales. Each one will be given an integer score from a 1 to 10, serving to summarize my thoughts and make the ranking easier. To make this more straightforward, I decided to remove a few games from the list for one reason or another. This includes, but is not limited to, Bionicle Heroes. This game is too much of a departure from the others for me to view it in the same light. Luckily, I've already discussed this one before, so if you want to see my thoughts on it, check out my review. LEGO Star Wars: The Complete Saga. While it fits the criteria, this game is mostly just a combination of the first 2 LEGO Star Wars games, and as both of those are in the running, it felt redundant to include this one. LEGO Rock Band. I think this one speaks for itself. LEGO City Undercover. This is the one I feel most awkward about not including, but as unsatisfying as it is to say, it just doesn't feel like it fits in here. LEGO Dimensions. Simply put, the Skylanders-esque format of this game seems like an obnoxious hurdle to properly judge it without killing my wallet. LEGO Worlds. Once again, major departure, though the game seems interesting in concept, so I might consider talking about it again some other day. This still leaves us with a pool of 23 games, possibly 24 if the Skywalker Saga releases before the series ends. Once everything has been covered, in the last part I will briefly rank these games from worst to best. As we're going in order of release, today I'll be covering LEGO Star Wars 1 and 2, LEGO Indiana Jones, and LEGO Batman. Alright, I've talked about this enough to the point I'm even confusing myself, so let's stop wasting time and get started. It's weird going back to the first LEGO game with an understanding of where the franchise would eventually go. This game released before LEGO games were deemed synonymous with the term formulaic, and at the time, people loved the concept of it, as shown by the fact that it ranked in the top 50 highest selling PS2 games. That being said, one of the reasons I decided to make this mini-series is seeing an article where someone else ranked the LEGO games, concluding the list with this game at the number 1 spot. And while I had fun revisiting it, to that I say no! Just because this game was well received at release and spawned a successful franchise doesn't mean the game itself is a masterpiece. Granted, it's not a bad game, but it borders on it. Let's start with the good elements. I've already made mention to the LEGO game formula, of which you'll be hearing often going forwards. This game introduces that in a highly accessible manner. There are 18 levels, including a bonus level for collecting a certain threshold of studs, the currency of these games, to reach true Jedi on the other 17. Additionally, after completing the first level of Episode 1, the doors for Episodes 2 and 3 open, allowing you to progress in each one individually. After completing levels, you unlock access to the characters used, and using the studs you collected, you can unlock additional characters and extras, which are essentially cheat codes. From there, you can replay any level with the characters unlocked, using their special abilities to access blocked off areas and collect all the game's mini-kits for 100% completion. Going back to this game many years and other LEGO games later, it was quite the surprise to see despite the game's objective ultimately boiling down to this, the developers had a greater focus on providing unique set pieces and making levels stand out from one another. There are only a handful of levels in this game, 8 that come to mind, that feel like the traditional LEGO game experience. That leaves over half of the remaining pool to feel unique. Fun fact, this game released before Revenge of the Sith, despite including a lot of the events that transpire in that movie. I know this is a bit of a tangent, but imagine if that happened today with context to the modern Star Wars fanbase. Another reason LEGO Star Wars likely had such positive reception was being so entertaining without needing to be challenging. Much of this is because the game's difficulty doesn't come through making the engagements easier as much as making the penalty of dying very forgiving. Other than in certain sections where you're reset to the beginning of a segment, all you have to worry about is disappearing for a second and losing a few studs that you have a brief window to recollect. This makes the game approachable regardless of your age or experience with games, and retains the clashiness of combat. Well, that depends on what character you select. Blaster users aren't terribly fun in this game, but characters wielding lightsabers are an absolute joy to use. The flips, lunges, slams, flashy combos, and force abilities are greatly satisfying, and as most have entirely unique animations, it makes trying other characters more enticing. I found General Grievous in particular to be one of the most fun characters I've used in any LEGO game, which is saying a lot because have you ever seen what gonk droids are capable of? Incredible. So I've had nothing but positive things to say about this game, yet consider it to be not that great. What gives? Simple. While LEGO Star Wars has all the markings of a fantastic game, even the licensed games of the time, it suffers from a considerable lack of polish. For starters, if you've ever played a LEGO game, you know their greatest strength tends to be the amount of content they offer. And while it may seem that way with this title, trust me, it's as deceptive as a scarecrow on Halloween night. Compared to the average LEGO game coming in with at least 15 hours of content, LEGO Star Wars barely scraped by 8, and the means of 100% completion are far less satisfying. On top of having no simple means to track your progress, such as the percentage meter all the other games include, while getting True Jedi remains the same, the way mini-kits are incorporated into levels is downright lazy. As opposed to the other games averaging about 5 to 6 well-placed mini-kits per level, this one usually only gets 1 or 2. This is because the majority are in very obvious, easy-to-access areas, from being in the path to progress, or even stacked on top of each other. As such, this first LEGO game feels more like one of those collectathons that just throws stuff wherever instead of making this game to be a thought-out scavenger hunt. Another area LEGO Star Wars seems unpolished is the sound design. For the most part, it's actually pretty good at immersing the player in the Star Wars universe. Every once in a while though, you'll get something that takes you out of the moment, like the soundtrack pulling a broken record, the majority of the characters making the same sounds, except for Darth Sidious who sounds particularly odd in cutscenes. And then there's whatever happens to the audio balance when you go outside Dexter's diner. From there, the rest of this game's faults are little things that pile on to the whole beta release feel. From the odd difficulty spikes brought about in the pod race and gunship levels as a result of the timers, the lack of detail in character expressions, the stilted mechanics when using a blaster, and so on. Heck, even the series staple of building constructs is more or less absent here, which is a major head scratcher. If some of these seem too nitpicky, it's likely because of later games, as I'll be getting to in just a moment, proving what this game could have been capable of with just a little more detail. As it stands, LEGO Star Wars is a milestone in LEGO games more closely entering the public eye, but it has all but been destroyed by the passage of time, with many of its flaws, even compared to games of that generation, since coming to light and utterly destroying the total product. As a whole, LEGO Star Wars gets a 3 out of 10. LEGO Star Wars 2. When I was in first grade, everyone at my school had already played 1 or 2 video games. Whether it was yeah, you get the joke. I apologize in advance for the footage in the background not coinciding with the points discussed as it usually would, but as I completed this game before coming up with the video idea, don't have any spare footage lying around, and I didn't want to replay the entire thing just because, I'll be including gameplay of going back to my recently completed save to fill the space. Thankfully, this is the only game in this list that I've discussed before, even if that video is as dated as a month-old banana. As such, this video serves more as an opportunity to update my thoughts on the game and or better explain specific points made throughout. For instance, my criticism of the humor has angered me beyond reason for years. It's comedy. It's one of the most subjective things on the planet. You can't criticize it when others might enjoy that style of humor, especially when you yourself like it. It's idiotic, and I can't believe you would do that, you daft adolescent twig chomper! much? Without further delay, let's go. LEGO Star Wars 2 is a game I enjoy discussing, considering how many firsts it was for me and how much time I've poured into it. Talking about the series as a whole though, and coming off the shoes of the first game, 2 is an expansion on nearly every element of the original. While lightsaber combat still mostly carries the same enjoyable features, characters who fight with blasters are more fun to use as they have more fluid movement, shoot faster, and don't stand in place when doing so. Additionally, all characters feel livelier, partly due to the added expression given to facial animations. The oddities of the sound design are addressed as well, avoiding the way too frequent immersion breaking in the original. That said, there's still an issue with the audio balancing between on-foot and vehicle stages, which is noticeable, but not as stark as Dexter's Diner. By far the best improvement to the original, however, is the implementation of this game's collectathon aspects. Studs are much more frequent, making it more rewarding to scour the levels and find them all, yet costs for unlocking characters are appropriately scaled up to compensate. Coinciding with that is the additions made to True Jedi, now separated between story and free play. Minikits are hidden much more carefully and require both a wide variety of different character abilities and a solid knack for exploration. Power bricks fill the same role but offer additional extras, which as opposed to the first game only having 2 actually useful ones, the majority of the bricks acquired through levels serve value here. Add on to this the monstrous amount of additional content and a progress meter in the cantina giving you a better idea how much of the game you have left to uncover, and it becomes clear that this is the game in which the amount of content became the greatest strength of the series. There is so much stuff to this game that despite owning it since I was 5, it took 9 years and multiple playthroughs before I ever completed it 100%. There is a ton of content here, though perhaps not all created equally. Before we get into that though, I'd like to expand on what was essentially my harshest critique on the game in my original review, the graphics. Now that I have a better understanding of what makes for good graphic design in games, I can pinpoint exactly what the problem is here. LEGO Star Wars 2 doesn't suffer from a lack of detail so much as an unsatisfactory clash between the models and environments. All LEGO-based objects are lighted and created in a way that makes them stand out extensively, which I guess helps somewhat with visibility, but causes them to mix with the landscapes as seamlessly as baking soda and vinegar. With that clarified, we can get into the content issues this game has. For one, LEGO Star Wars 2 gets pretty repetitive when going for completion, and the fault mostly rides on Super Story. With this extra challenge in each of the episodes, essentially you're required to play through each level at least 3 times, making the overall experience feel far too padded out. That's mostly excusable, but there's one other thing that holds the game back a little. The vehicle stages can eat rocks! Whereas the rest of this game is fun to explore, free of stress, and amusing, the vehicle stages almost feel as if they exist purely to make your blood boil. The Battle of Hoth in particular was my earliest memory of a game making me want to throw the computer out the window and then get in trouble because it belonged to my mother. These horrid abominations take up 4 of the 18 levels, 3 of which are almost in complete succession of one another, making the game slow down drastically at that point. Still, this game holds a special place in my heart. LEGO Star Wars 2 is about 18 hours long, and while a third of that experience is pretty underwhelming, the rest is still great and holds up phenomenally well today. LEGO Star Wars 2 gets a 6 out of 10. Indiana Jones is arguably the most criminally underrepresented multimedia franchise in the world of video games. In my time, not counting mobile games, there have only been 4 titles under the IP released, including the 2 LEGO games, Staff of Kings, which I own but have never finished, and a 2003 game called Emperor's Tomb, which I had never heard of before making this video, and now I really want to try. This is in addition to a game they intended to make for it that they used to show off the Euphoria engine getting sadly cancelled, which was such a missed opportunity if that tech demo was anything to go off of. Needless to say, for such an iconic and deservingly well-received series to have so little in a predominant form of media, it's only fair we look at the most well-known and successful venture it had. LEGO Indiana Jones is, well, to get ahead of myself a little, way better than I expected. I've 100% completed the DS version when I was younger, but it's been so long and other LEGO games remained in my mind more vividly that I assumed the console version wouldn't be much different. It was. Not counting the complete saga upscaling the graphics of the previous two titles, this was the game in which the series jumped to HD. And my gosh, does it show. Remember the model environment clash issue I mentioned only a couple minutes ago? Yeah, that's gone here. The quality of both match one another in a way that pops so much more satisfactorily, and not once did I think to myself, what's this Lego object doing in the middle of Egypt? Why am I using that voice? Also on the topic of graphics, they made further general enhancements to elements Lego Star Wars 2 had improved on, such as facial animations, a smoother frame rate, and other quality of life touches that keep the game flowing. Now this didn't come without a few hiccups, as glitches seem to be a common issue, and on a couple occasions required restarting entire levels. However, not all of them were that terrible. For instance, today I learned monkeys are supernatural beings.
Monkey.
You want to know what was improved most in this game though? Well, obviously since you're still watching the video. Easily, it's the gameplay. But don't Lego games just copy the gameplay of Lego Star Wars every time? Shut up! Just shut up, okay? I know, this series can get formulaic sometimes, but you don't go around saying every Mario game is just copy-pasted, do you? That's because it's a winning formula that they make minor changes to in order to separate one game from another. And ultimately, that's what determines how good the final product is. Lego games, in my opinion, follow the same rules here, and Indiana Jones goes above and beyond in doing that. Compared to the previous two games, which are more arcade-like, this one further offers the sense of a next-gen experience by being centered more on the experience of story mode. They do this multiple ways, one of the smallest but most notable being the flow of combat, and subsequently its animations. I can't entirely explain it, but fights just have more smoothness to them regardless of who you're playing. When it comes to playing Indy, however, they went all out. Instead of just wailing away with your regular 3-hit melee combo, you're able to readily transition between pummeling enemies and using the whip for utilitarian purposes, either for extra range or to grab weapons from enemies, which I'll get to shortly. Additionally, when it comes to your attacks, rather than always doing the typical punch animations, you have a chance of getting a randomized special takedown. Sadly, they only seem to be frequent or happen at all when using Indiana, but as he's in every single level, I'm not going to count against that. Moving on, I mentioned it briefly, but another update to the gameplay formula that was great is that it introduces pickups to the series. There are one-off uses for this, like carrying a box from one spot to another, but this also allows you to use what would normally be items for granting character-specific abilities, regardless of who you're currently playing. I really like this, because it's a way to add more variety to the obstacles playing through story mode without having to make up excuses for why this random character would have this special ability for certain scenario. Like, I don't know, Jar Jar being able to launch into the air with the effectiveness of a SpaceX model. This most affects the overall experience when it comes to the puzzles. I've always considered the combat and puzzles to be equally important in LEGO games, but with 1 and 2, that doesn't feel as much of a focus, likely due to the source material. Indiana Jones is all about exploring and navigating strange and uncharted locations, so it's only fair they make the puzzle solving a more refined part of the game. I was never left completely stumped on anything, but there were a few that had me scratching my head at times, and that's plenty to satisfy me with this series. The final way story mode is made more fun, and carrying well into the rest of the game, is how well balanced the collectathon elements are. This includes the ratio between studs acquired and the amount needed for 100% completion, and the mini-kits, now called artifacts, having a good disparity between how many you can acquire in story mode versus free play mode. LEGO Star Wars 1 had too many acquirable in story mode, averaging about 7, and LEGO Star Wars 2, while better than 1, could be argued had too few, with an average of 2. This game hits just the right spot, averaging about 5 artifacts to be found in a thorough playthrough of story mode. Too long, didn't listen. The collectibles in this game are just right, neither too frequent or too sparse. Now, I've mostly said only good things about this game, and that's because it's a standout for certain. But is there anything wrong with it? Well, a few things. For one, while the story mode half of the game is exceptional, the free play and bonus content is more just standard quality for a LEGO experience. The factor that I think holds it down most is the characters. There simply aren't that many interesting ones outside of those you unlock by just playing the game. Many of the new additions you get feel like just worthless bloat, and the only ones that are worth having in addition for going back to free play are the Thuggies and the Nazi Demolitionists. Yeah, I just canceled myself for saying that, didn't I? Well, if it makes up for it, the Nazi body count you leave behind in this game is in the hundreds at least, so it checks out. I also got a kick out of the bonus unlock. Going through the game in free play, there are 5 Star Wars characters hidden in specific levels, and finding them all lets you unlock and play as Han Solo, letting you play him beside Indiana Jones in a crossover event for the history books. The only problem though is, while some of his features were updated for the new game, they seem to have skipped over his expressions.
My God, what's wrong with your face?
And the biggest issue with this game is, while many elements of the game were properly updated for next-gen systems, the camera was not. As opposed to the other games I've talked about, I got to play this one with 3 different people, and I noticed every one of them had trouble with the platforming segments because of awkward and poorly placed camera angles. Even I struggled with it, and LEGO games come to me as naturally as consuming food, only they're even easier to make a decision on. I need to eat more. All things considered though, this game was most definitely a step in the right direction for this series, and to this day remains a notable title worth a purchase. LEGO Indiana Jones earns a solid 8 out of 10. In the days of keeping up with the series by playing its DS releases, this was one of my favorites. I can't explain why, as this was a decade ago and before my depression years muddied up my memory. Still, it meant I was excited to revisit it on the console version, especially after seeing how great the Indiana Jones game turned out. Unfortunately though, this game ended up somewhat disappointing, though at least still a good entry. If nothing else, this was a particularly good one to play through for the purposes of this series, as it demonstrates the LEGO game formula at its most fundamental and average level. That's not to say this game has nothing new to offer, because there are, as always, a few neat slice-of-life changes. All of the missions in LEGO Batman have you following the Caped Crusader and Robin, second in the records of legendary sidekicks only to the unfathomable Arthur.
Not in the face!
As they put a stop to 3 different teams of villains brought together from Batman's expansive rogues gallery, before the leaders of each, Riddler, Penguin, and Joker respectively, can enact their nefarious schemes. Of all the LEGO games up to this point, this one is by far the most action-oriented. Compared to Indiana Jones, this one retains the fluidity of combat animations and the randomized special takedowns, but in place of item pickups, you have 2 new skills at your disposal, a grab and a batarang throw. The batarangs are a great addition, offering both a ranged attack, a multi-target attack, and even a resource for solving puzzles in specific circumstances. The grabs, on the other hand, are not as exciting. They look cool, but are slower to execute and can get in the way of other character actions as they are almost all linked to the B button. These aren't the only new tools at our hero's disposal though. As an actual replacement of the item pickups, both Batman and Robin have several alternate suits that they can change into at various buildable stands throughout the levels. These add considerably more variety to the number of ways you're able to progress through levels with just 2 characters. Some of these are even unique to any other character's special abilities, such as Batman's heat protection and sonic suit, and Robin's attract and magnetic ones.
As a final note on changes to story mode, this game does something remarkable for the series.
Vehicle stages don't suck anymore! Aside from the Batwing one, the others between these levels and the ones I haven't gotten to yet are all pretty fun. They feel better to control, have cooler unique abilities, and perform their job of breaking up the monotony of the on-foot stages successfully. Well, almost successfully, because there's a fundamental flaw in the design of every hero mission, one I noticed immediately but took lots of reflection to properly understand. LEGO Batman is the first game in the series based on a property that's not a set of movies. As such, where the other games could use the set pieces from their respective movies to structure the levels, this time they had to draw each level up entirely from scratch, and they didn't exactly do a good job of it. Every level in this game feels far too similar to each other because they all have the same formula. Get through the defenses of a villain's henchman, fight that villain, then move on to the next one until the big baddie has been defeated and the chapter is complete. Even before I realized this, I was getting fatigued of these levels, because once you've seen one, you've essentially seen them all. In fact, the only thing left you really need to see would be Joker shooting himself in a kid's game. Luckily, however, that criticism only applies to half of the game thanks to its coolest feature, the villain missions. Yeah, that's right. All 3 chapters of this game have an alternate version where you play the villains' perspectives. I can't quite tell if this is an alternate timeline of the villains succeeding, or just showing the events before their hero mission counterpart, but nevertheless, it's a cool touch. They also are much more creative, both with a wider cast of characters, even if always limited to 2 per level, and varied end goals to make each one feel more unique. Now, while I love this and consider it the game's main selling point, there is a catch, because of course there is. You see, not only does this mean there are 30 total story missions in this game, but they all require replaying in free play for 100% completion, bogging down and prolonging the total game length far past what it needed to be. Now, I'm not saying they should have outright removed free play, as we'll get into next time what makes that an issue. Rather, I feel the villain missions were already a unique perspective shift from the main story, and so playing through them again to uncover several otherwise inaccessible secrets seems redundant. Plus, this game also has a problem with where it places minikits. The Indiana Jones game had this at points, with a minuscule number placed in areas obscured by player vision and seemingly out of bounds. This game, though, averages at least 1 like that per level, which gets really annoying and adds to the drawn-out length. As a final criticism for this game, I want to briefly cover the bonus levels. They suck. I won't pretend I'm the biggest fan of the bonus levels in LEGO Star Wars 2 or Indiana Jones in regards to the 1 million stud challenges. However, they're at least creatively designed levels that make for a good conclusion in utilizing just about every single character ability or additional game feature. In this game, however, despite having 2 bonus levels, both fall flat on their face due to more gimmicky design choices. The Arkham Asylum one is excusable in that it's mostly just straightforward and boring, with a weird Pac-Man thing going on. The Wayne Manor level, however, is awful, hiding almost every stud in these 2 sub-levels, one of which even containing awkwardly placed or even hidden blocks, leading to a painfully frustrating experience I spent way too long on. Now, I know I've said a lot of bad stuff just now, but in summary, LEGO Batman was still a mostly fun experience that I feel expanded the boundaries for what properties this series could successfully adapt. Due to major oversights in its design, I'd consider it a middling entry, but at the end of the day, one that benefited the series as a whole. LEGO Batman gets a 5 out of 10. And so, these 4 games would establish a certified formula for success. There are many more games to explore on this adventure, and it'll be interesting to see if they live up to these ones. That will have to be left for next time though, so until then, thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to slice that like button in half, subscribe to my channel if you are new, and if you aren't, feel free to share this video around. Also, don't be afraid to share your thoughts on these games in the comments and discuss them, either with myself or anyone else. I know these games have a lot of nostalgic value, and I'd love to see those memories and feelings shared. Just keep things civil. Once again though, hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you all next time. Goodbye.